The next day, a single dad risked it all. His job, his dignity, his fragile stability, just to save his drunk boss Emma. But no one at the office knew that yet. They only saw Marcus enter with weary eyes and a face that carried both exhaustion and quiet decency. The kind of man who'd rather take the blame than start a fight. He walked through the glass doors, holding a lukewarm coffee, unaware that by noon, his name would echo in the HR office like a warning. The night before had been a celebration, the company's annual gala, laughter, champagne, and praise for those at the top. Emma, his boss, arrived late and already smelled faintly of gin. She wore her success like armor, sharp heels clicking across marble floors, every word she spoke coated with tension and the brittle confidence of someone running from something unseen. People smiled when she passed, but their eyes followed with judgment. Marcus had stayed quiet in a corner, clapping politely during speeches, pretending not to notice how Emma's laughter grew louder with each refill. When she knocked over a glass and shouted at a junior manager for being too slow, the room went silent. Then came the nervous chuckles, the forced small talk to mask embarrassment. Emma waved it off, called for another drink, and stumbled toward the exit. Marcus hesitated. He could have gone home, to his daughter asleep in her small pink room, to a life built on routine and restraint. But something in Emma's eyes had flashed pain before she turned away, a flicker of loneliness that mirrored his own. So he followed. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting. Emma dropped her keys near the curb, muttering to herself. She was trembling, her mascara running, anger and shame mixing into something human. Marcus crouched down, picked up the keys, and said softly, "You shouldn't drive. Emma, let me call you a cab. Don't tell me what to do." She slurred, trying to snatch the keys back. When she missed, she laughed, then cried. In that fragile, broken sound, Marcus saw the truth. Beneath her cruelty was exhaustion, the kind that doesn't sleep or heal. He helped her sit on the curb. She leaned on his shoulder, whispering things he couldn't fully understand. Everyone leaves. Everyone. He didn't answer. He just stayed until a car arrived, called her sister, made sure Emma got home safely. No one else saw. No one cared to. The next morning, the office looked the same, sterile and bright. But when Marcus opened his email, his stomach dropped. Report to HR immediately. He walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. Whispers floated behind him like smoke. Inside the HR office, a woman with tight lips and colder eyes read from a folder. Marcus, we've received a complaint regarding inappropriate conduct last night. Ms. Grant said you followed her to her vehicle, restrained her, and made her feel unsafe. The words hit like a punch. That's not true, Marcus said quietly. She was intoxicated. I stopped her from driving. She didn't mention that. Of course she didn't. Why would she? Emma was powerful, respected, protected. He was a single dad who fixed broken printers and stayed late to avoid child care fees. The HR rep continued. Until this is resolved, you're suspended without pay. Marcus stared at the table. In his mind, he saw his daughter's lunchbox, the overdue rent notice, the photo of his late wife taped to his dashboard. Everything he'd worked to keep afloat was slipping again, and all he could do was nod. As he walked out, people avoided his eyes. Only the janitor gave a small nod, a silent gesture that said I know. Marcus took his coat, stepped into the cold daylight, and whispered to himself, I did the right thing, didn't I? He didn't know it yet, but the choice he made that night, the kindness that cost him everything, was about to change both their lives forever. At 6:10 every morning, before the sun had the courage to rise, Marcus was already awake. He moved through the small two-bedroom apartment in silence, careful not to wake his daughter. He made the same breakfast every day, oatmeal with a splash of milk, half a banana slice then, and a small swirl of honey. He liked the predictability. In a world that had taken so much from him, routine was his armor, his peace. His daughter, Leela, was 7, a curious storm of crayons and questions. Her laughter was the one sound that could still make Marcus forget the weight he carried. She looked like her mother, same nose, same light in the eyes when she was thinking of something mischievous. But there were mornings when that resemblance made his chest ache more than he let on. It had been 3 years since cancer stole Marie. Swift, cruel, and final. Marcus didn't cry much, not because he didn't feel, but because once he started, he feared he wouldn't stop. Instead, he poured himself into being a father, a provider, a protector. After breakfast, He packed Leela's lunchbox with surgical precision. Sandwich cut into hearts, apple slices, a note that read, "Be kind today. Love, Dad." Every day, without fail. By 7:15, she was up, dragging her blanket behind her like a cape. "Daddy, can I wear my glitter shoes today?" she'd ask with a grin missing to front teeth. "As long as they don't light up during math class," he'd reply, kneeling to tie them with care. There was no one else, no help, just him and Leela, and the quiet determination of a man who refused to let grief define his daughter's life. He worked at a mid-sized tech firm in the operations department. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but it paid the bills, barely. He was the kind of employee who kept things running behind the scenes, fixing spreadsheets no one else could decode, staying late to reset routers, helping interns without being asked. He didn't complain when shifts got extended. He didn't push back when people ignored his ideas. He just did the work. At lunch, he usually sat alone, not because he was antisocial, but because conversations drained him. Most coworkers talked about weekend trips, date nights, fitness classes. Marcus thought about grocery lists and whether the second-hand shoes he bought for Leela would last until spring. He didn't drink, didn't date. There wasn't time. His evenings were filled with spelling tests and reheated dinners, washing her hair and folding tiny socks. At night, they read from the same storybook, the one Marie had read to Lilo when she was still strong enough to speak. Marcus did all the voices, even the silly ones. Especially the silly ones, because it made Leela laugh, and that laughter was the one thing that made the silence in his chest bearable. He didn't talk much about Marie, but sometimes, when Leela was asleep, he sat by her bedroom door and whispered, "I'm trying. I hope you're proud of me." Marcus wasn't perfect. He lost his temper once in a while, forgot the laundry, burned the toast, but he never raised his voice, never lied, and never, ever walked past someone who needed help. He believed that kindness didn't cost anything, except sometimes, everything. And that's what made the moment with Emma so devastating, because Marcus wasn't the kind of man who wanted recognition. He was the kind who did the right thing because it was right, even if no one saw, especially if no one saw. And now, the weight of that decision, the one he made for someone who never once thanked him, was beginning to crush him. He didn't regret it, but he was tired. So very tired. The office was a fortress of glass and silence. Every wall was transparent, but no one ever truly saw each other. Light poured in through the tall windows, harsh and cold, reflecting off metal surfaces and spotless tile. Desks were aligned in neat rows like soldiers, and each one was guarded by headphones, monitors, and the invisible boundaries of disinterest. The only sound was the tapping of keys and the occasional clink of coffee cups against ceramic. Marcus moved through it like a ghost. Present, but unnoticed. He walked the same path every morning, nodding politely to people who rarely looked up. Conversations happened in whispers, always careful, always guarded. There was no laughter here, no mistakes, just performance and pressure, cloaked in professional smiles. Emma's office sat at the far end of the floor, encased in glass like a queen behind ice. Frosted panels disguised her figure, but everyone knew when she was there. The air changed. People straightened. Emails got double-checked. It was unspoken, but well understood. When Emma entered, someone else's day would likely be ruined. Her door rarely opened. When it did, it slammed, loud, final, like a gavel. No one questioned her authority. Even after the gala, even after the mess, her title made her untouchable, and that made Marcus's suspension all the more bitter. He had protected the one person who didn't need protection. At his desk, the tension pressed against his back like an unseen hand. He could feel the eyes of coworkers scanning him when they thought he wasn't looking. He heard the murmur of hushed conversation stop when he walked by, not out of concern, but caution, as if helping someone in power, especially a woman like Emma, made him dangerous. Or worse, disloyal. The break room was no better. He poured his coffee in silence, standing beneath the unforgiving glare of LED lights, while others glanced up only briefly before returning to their phones. No one asked how he was. No one asked what happened. They didn't want the truth. They just wanted distance. And then there was home. As soon as Marcus crossed the threshold of the apartment, the tension fell away like a second skin. The air smelled of vanilla and crayons. Leela's backpack lay tossed by the couch. The TV played a cartoon too loudly. A pile of unfolded laundry waited patiently beside a Lego tower. The walls were a warm yellow, not by design but by instinct. Marcus had picked the color one morning when he couldn't stand how gray the world felt. Here, everything was imperfect and alive. "Daddy, I made you a card," Leela shouted from her fort of pillows. It was crooked and covered in glitter, but the words glowed. "You're the bravest daddy in the world." Marcus smiled, the kind that reached only one side of his face. He hung her card on the fridge, beside grocery lists and overdue bills. Then he bent down and pulled her into a hug, breathing in the soft scent of peanut butter and shampoo. He never spoke of work here. This place was a sanctuary, not because it was free from chaos, but because it was full of love. The world outside was always waiting to pounce, always watching. But inside these walls, Marcus could just be a father, just a man who tried. Still, as he tucked Leela into bed that night, reading from her favorite book beneath the gentle hum of a bedside lamp, the image of Emma's closed office door hovered in his mind, unforgiving, icy, looming, a place people feared. And now, a place that had marked him. The email came, and just after lunch. It was short, sharp, and unsigned. "Emma needs you in her office." Now. Marcus felt the eyes on him as he stood, felt the way conversation thinned out like steam. The soft tapping of keyboards slowed, then resumed as he passed by, as if everyone suddenly remembered they were supposed to be busy. He straightened his shirt, rubbed his palms together, and walked the long corridor to the glass room at the end of the hall. Emma didn't look up when he entered. She was sitting behind her desk, legs crossed, tapping a pen rhythmically against her knee. Her eyes were bloodshot, but her lipstick was perfect. The only thing that betrayed her were her hands, restless, twitching, betraying a storm she was trying to cage. "You didn't send the Hawthorne report," she said flatly. Marcus blinked. "I submitted it last week. You asked me to wait for your final sign-off." "I don't recall that. I emailed you twice, and I followed up on Tuesday. You were supposed to approve." Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Are you saying this is my fault?" A silence stretched between them. Marcus inhaled slowly. "No, I'm saying there's a record. I can pull up the... I don't care about your records." "Marcus," she snapped. "I needed that report finalized by Friday. It wasn't. Hawthorne is reconsidering the contract. That's on you." It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them. Calculated, public, loud enough for the whole way to hear. Through the glass walls, heads turned, faces dipped out of sight. Some pretended to stretch, others just stared. No one knocked, no one entered, no one stopped it. Marcus swallowed the heat rising in his chest. "Emma, with all due respect, don't lecture me," she hissed. "This is a professional environment, not your garage." The words hit harder than she realized. Marcus flinched, just barely, but she saw it. And for a second, the mask slipped. Something flickered across her face. Regret, maybe, but it passed quickly, smothered by pride. "You can go," she said. He turned without another word and walked back to his desk, face burning, pulse pounding. When he sat down, his hands trembled over the keyboard, not with fear, but with restraint. With fury he couldn't afford. He didn't care that people were watching. He cared that no one had spoken up. 30 minutes later, an HR rep appeared beside his desk. "Marcus, can I have a word?" They went into a small conference room, one of those fake friendly spaces with beanbag chairs no one used and motivational quotes in black cursive on the walls. "Be the energy you want to attract." He stared at it as she spoke. "We've had some concerns raised about a pattern of delays." Emma specifically noted the Hawthorne incident and a few other minor issues. "I have documentation for all of it," he replied. The delays were on her end. "I've never missed a deadline without cause." The HR rep nodded mechanically, lips pressed thin. "Still, the optics aren't ideal. You've had the flags this quarter. Just letting you know, you're on informal notice." Informal. The word sat in his stomach like acid. It meant, we don't have enough to fire you, but we're watching, waiting. "Is that all?" he asked. She smiled politely. For now, back at his desk, Marcus stared at the monitor, but the words swam. His inbox was a blur. He saw a message from Leela's school, field trip form due. He'd have to print it at home. He saw the corner of his daughter's drawing tacked to the cubicle wall, a stick-figure dad with a bright red cape. A hero. What a joke. He clenched his jaw, eyes burning, heart heavy. The injustice wasn't just in being blamed, it was in being erased. In knowing that truth didn't matter when power wore heels and red lipstick and had friends in the right departments. People passed by, Some glanced at him. No one stopped. No one offered so much as a nod. Cowards, he thought. But he didn't blame them. Not really. They were afraid too. Afraid of Emma. Afraid of losing what little security they had. He could feel it. The pull to lash out. To walk into her office and scream. To tell HR everything about that night. The drinking. The slurring. The threats. But then he saw his daughter's smile in his mind. Soft and innocent. Untouched by the bitterness of adults. So he said nothing. Because if he lost this job, he lost everything. Rent was 2 weeks late. Groceries were a guessing game. Lila's shoes had holes he hadn't told her about. Her birthday was coming. He couldn't give her justice, but he could try to keep the lights on. He breathed, swallowed, typed. Not because he was weak, but because survival sometimes looked like silence. And while Emma sat in her glass throne pretending to be untouchable, Marcus sat quietly in the shadows, holding back a storm. Marcus sat in his car long after the parking lot had emptied, the last streaks of daylight fading into bruised orange and gray. The hum of the engine had gone silent an hour ago, but he hadn't moved. His hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. The weight of the day pressing down like something physical, something that might never let go. He could see his reflection faintly in the windshield, tired eyes. The faint trace of stubble he'd forgotten to shave. A man trying too hard to hold himself together. On the dashboard, a photo curled at the edges, a small, sun-faded picture of Marie. She was smiling in it, the way she used to, when life still had color. Her hair was tied back, her hands dusted with flour from the cupcakes she'd baked for Lila's 5th birthday. He had taken that picture just before she died, not knowing it would become his anchor. "I'm trying," he whispered, voice cracking. "I really am, Marie, but I don't know how much more I can take." The words broke something open. He pressed his forehead to the steering wheel, and for the first time in months, he let himself cry. Not the quiet tears that came with exhaustion, but the deep, raw kind that scraped the soul on their way out. Every humiliation, every loss, every moment he had swallowed his anger just to survive. It all came pouring out. Images flickered through his mind like old film reels. Marie sitting on the porch, sunlight on her face, her laugh, soft and unguarded. The way she used to touch his cheek when he doubted himself and whisper, "You're stronger than you think." He could almost hear her now, and it hurt because she wasn't. He wanted to quit. He wanted to walk back into that office, throw his badge on Emma's desk, and tell her exactly what she was, a coward hiding behind power. He wanted to drive until the city disappeared behind him, find some small town where no one knew his name. But every road in his mind circled back to one face. Lilo. He thought of her in the schoolyard, waving from the swings, trusting him to be there. He thought of her shoes, too small now, and her laughter echoing through their cramped apartment. He thought of her questions about heaven, the ones he never really knew how to answer, and that was what kept him there, breathing through the ache instead of giving up. The passenger seat was a mess. School forms, snack wrappers, a crayon or two that had melted in the summer heat. On top of the pile sat a folded piece of paper, one he hadn't noticed before. Lila's handwriting was scrawled across the front in purple marker. "For Daddy." He opened it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of the two of them. He was standing tall, a big red cape flowing behind him, and above them was a shaky heart drawn with too much love for such small hands. Underneath, in wobbly letters, she'd written, "You're my hero, Dad." That did it. Marcus covered his face with both hands and sobbed, quiet, aching sounds muffled by the empty air around him. The kind of crying that didn't ask for comfort, only release. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to be that man again, the one Marie had believed in, the one his daughter saw in her drawings. But right now, all he felt was small, powerless. He looked up at Marie's photo again, his eyes red and wet. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I did the right thing, and it still feels like I'm being punished." The silence answered back. Just the faint ticking of the cooling engine, the soft rustle of paper as the drawing slipped from his lap onto the floor. He picked it up and smoothed it gently against the dashboard, pinning it next to Marie's photo with a piece of tape he found in the glove compartment. The picture looked awkward there, childish next to the woman's smile, but somehow, it made sense. The past and the future, side by side. The reasons he still kept going. Marcus leaned back, eyes closed, breathing in the smell of old coffee and cheap air freshener. The storm inside him hadn't passed, but for the first time in hours, he felt something close to calm. Tomorrow, he would get up again. He didn't know how he'd face Emma. He didn't know what the world would take from him next. But he'd still show up, because his daughter needed her hero, even if the world didn't see one. The next day, Emma didn't show up. No emails, no meetings. Her office sat dark and hollow behind its frosted glass, door ajar like a wound left unattended. The office carried on, tight-lipped and efficient, but under the surface, the tension was a silent scream. Marcus noticed immediately, not because he missed her presence, but because the air felt different. Lighter, maybe, or just uncertain. People whispered a little more boldly, glanced at her empty office with vague curiosity. One voice floated to close behind him near the break room. She was at that dive bar off Route 12 last night. A woman murmured to her coworker, slumped over the counter, alone. Marcus paused, coffee mug in hand. She's spiraling, the man replied. Heard she nearly got into her car. Marcus didn't turn around. He just stood there, staring into the dark swirl of his coffee, heart beginning to race. That bar was 20 minutes from here, right near the old truck stop, just past the bend where the streetlights flickered. He thought of Marie. He thought of Leela. He thought of Emma. He didn't owe her anything. She had humiliated him, nearly cost him his job, erased the truth without hesitation. But then he remembered that night outside the gala, the way she'd collapsed on the curb, her voice trembling with something that sounded like heartbreak. He had seen it then, for a split second, a woman unraveling in silence, and no one had cared. No one except him. He looked down at the drawing still tucked in his wallet. You're my hero, Dad. He glanced at the clock. To 14 p.m. If he left now, it would be obvious. If anyone asked, there would be no lie to cover him. He would be risking everything. But some things mattered more than rules. Without a word, Marcus grabbed his coat and walked out. The wind had a bite to it, sharper than the day before. As he pulled onto the highway, doubts crept in. What are you doing? This isn't your problem. She made her choice. You don't owe her this. But still, he drove. The bar looked like it hadn't changed since 1985. Flickering neon, a parking lot full of potholes and regret. A single car sat crooked near the edge of the lot, Emma's silver sedan. The headlights were off, but the engine was still running. Marcus parked beside her and stepped out slowly, the gravel crunching beneath his feet. He approached the driver's side window and saw her, slumped against the steering wheel, eyes half-lidded, keys trembling in her fingers. He tapped the window. At first, she didn't move. Then she flinched, startled, her eyes bloodshot and confused. Recognition flickered. Marcus. She slurred. What the hell? Unlock the door, he said calmly. She hesitated, hand hovering near the ignition. Please, he added. Just give me the keys. Something in his voice broke through whatever haze she was drowning in. She clicked the lock. He opened the door gently and reached for the keys. I'm fine, she muttered, trying to sit up straighter. Go back to your family. I don't need saving. He didn't argue. He just stepped in front of the driver's seat and crouched, meeting her eyes with a quiet steadiness. I'm not here to save you, he said. I'm here because if you drive off like this, you won't make it home. Her chin trembled. I'm tired. Marcus, she whispered. I'm just so tired. He nodded. I know. I messed up. He didn't respond. I hurt people, she added, voice cracking. You. Most of all. The apology hung there, fragile and unformed, but real. Marcus took out his phone and called a cab. Then he leaned against the open car door and waited with her as the engine ticked into silence. The cold settled in, but neither of them moved. Emma started to cry, not the dramatic sobs of guilt or shame, just slow, painful tears that slid down her cheeks without resistance, like something finally breaking free. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, still and steady, the way a tree stands through a storm. When the cab arrived, he opened the back door and helped her inside. She didn't resist. As the driver pulled away, she turned to look at him through the window. For the first time, she looked small, human. And for a long time after the taillights disappeared, Marcus stood alone in that empty parking lot, wondering what it meant to do the right thing, when no one would ever see it. He didn't have answers, but something inside him, something long buried, felt lighter, not healed, but maybe, just maybe, a little less broken. It didn't take long. By mid-morning the next day, Marcus was summoned to HR again, the same sterile conference room, the same faux pleasant smile from the representative. Only this time, her tone held something new, something measured. We've been informed that you left the office unexpectedly yesterday. Marcus didn't lie. Yes, I did. And you didn't inform your supervisor. He shook his head once. No, there was a pause. She tapped her pen against the table, the rhythm sharp and precise. You understand that unauthorized absences can be grounds for formal disciplinary action. Marcus folded his hands in his lap. Steady. I understand. She watched him for a long beat, as if waiting for an excuse, a defense, something he would not give. Then, a knock at the door. Emma. Her presence sent a hush through the hallway. She looked different, smaller, maybe, but clearer. Her hair pulled back, her face bare of makeup. No mask, no sharpness. Just a woman holding herself together with visible effort. The HR rep stood, surprised. Ms. Grant, I asked to be notified when this meeting started, Emma said calmly, stepping in and closing the door behind her. I need to speak. Marcus looked at her, unsure what to expect. Her voice was different, softer, real. She turned toward the HR rep. Everything you've heard about Marcus's conduct is wrong. I lied. The room fell still. She took a breath. At the gala, I was drunk. I caused a scene. He tried to help me, and I repaid that kindness by blaming him. Then I did it again with the Hawthorne report. I was embarrassed. I panicked, and I took it out on the one person who didn't deserve it. The HR rep glanced between them. Stunned. Emma continued, voice firmer now. Yesterday, I nearly drove drunk, again. Marcus stopped me. He risked his job, his reputation, everything, to keep me safe. No one else would have. No one else did. She looked at Marcus, eyes full of something close to shame. I'm resigning, effective immediately. I've spoken with the board. I've arranged for a leave of absence. I'll be checking into rehab. The silence after that felt enormous. Marcus sat still, heart heavy and strangely hollow. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't expected it. But part of him, some buried part, was grateful she'd told the truth. Emma turned back to the HR rep. You'll reinstate Marcus, fully, with back pay. And if you're looking for a new team lead, there's no one better. Then she nodded to Marcus, once, and left the room. It was over in minutes, but the effects rippled. By the end of the day, the whispers had changed tone. People passed his desk with a different kind of glance, one laced with something like respect. Not loud, not dramatic, just small shifts in the way they spoke to him, the way they paused when he answered, the way they listened. One by one, quiet acknowledgments surfaced. A pat on the shoulder from a manager who'd never said his name aloud. A nod from a coworker who once scoffed at his lunchbox notes. The next morning, Marcus was called into a different office. Higher up. They offered him the team lead position, Emma's old title. He sat across from them, stunned, trying to process the enormity of it. The salary jump, the respect, the stability, everything he'd once thought was out of reach. He accepted, but he didn't celebrate. There was no smugness, no vindication, just quiet acceptance, and the aching awareness of how hard the road had been to get here. He returned to his desk, opened his drawer, and took out Leela's drawing, the crayon hero with the red cape. He pinned it to the divider above his monitor, even though it didn't match the corporate decor. Let them stare. He didn't care. Later, that week, Emma sent him a handwritten note. Just a few lines. I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for who I was while doing it. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. He folded the note carefully and tucked it away. He wouldn't display it, wouldn't flaunt it, but he'd keep it, because sometimes redemption doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, after everything else has gone quiet. In the end, Marcus didn't gloat. He just went home early that night, picked up Leela from school, and held her a little longer than usual. Because truth had finally won. And for once, it hadn't needed to shout to be heard. It had been 3 months. The seasons had shifted quietly. Soft snow now melted into early spring puddles, the city blinking awake from its long, cold sleep. The office, too, had changed in subtle ways. The tension that once filled every corner had eased. People smiled a little more, paused to chat at the coffee machine, and Marcus, now in a role that bore his name on the department door, had found a rhythm. Not easy, but steady. He didn't think about Emma much anymore, not because he didn't care, but because he knew that some people had to disappear for a while in order to survive. And if she was healing, if she was safe, That was enough. So when the front desk buzzed and told him a guest was waiting downstairs, he didn't expect it to be her. She stood in the lobby in a soft gray coat, hair shorter now, face thinner, but her eyes, clear this time, held something steadier than he remembered. "Hi," she said simply. Marcus didn't speak for a moment. He only nodded. "I won't take up much of your time," she said. I wanted to see you. One last thing." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. "I heard your daughter likes to write stories." He blinked. "She does." Emma smiled. Gently? "Well, I saw this and thought of her." She handed it to him. A leather-bound notebook, rich brown with gold trim. Embossed on the front in delicate lettering were the words, "For stories about heroes like my dad." Marcus stared at it, unmoving. "I didn't know what else to say." She added softly, "But she should have a place to write them." He opened the cover. The first page was blank, waiting, like possibility. His throat tightened. "That night," Emma said, voice low, "when you stopped me, I wanted to die. I really did. But you saw something in me. Or maybe you just saw what I was becoming. Either way, you gave me a second chance, and I've been trying every day since not to waste it." She reached out gently, touched his arm. "I'm sorry. For everything." He nodded again, words stuck behind emotion. Then, unexpectedly, she opened her arms, just slightly, and waited. He stepped forward. The hug was brief, quiet, but heavy with everything they didn't say. Forgiveness, grief, grace. All of it passed between them in that silent embrace. When they pulled apart, there were tears in her eyes, and in his. She turned to leave, pausing only once at the door. "Tell Leela, I can't wait to read her first story." And then she was gone. Marcus stood in the quiet lobby for a long time, holding the notebook to his chest like something sacred. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but this moment, was a closing of a chapter, not with triumph, but with tenderness. Later, that evening, he handed the notebook to Leela at the dinner table. Her eyes lit up. "Can I start tonight?" she asked. "Of course," he said, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. She opened it, pen in hand, tongue between her teeth in focus. "What should I write first?" He smiled. "Start with the story of the woman who almost gave up, and the man who wouldn't let her." The evening air was crisp but kind, the way spring sometimes surprises you after a long, hard winter. Marcus held Leela's hand as they walked home together, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step, her voice trailing off from a story she'd been making up since they left the schoolyard. And then the dragon said, "No way. Princess, you saved me," she finished, eyes wide with the thrill of her own imagination. Marcus laughed, the sound soft and full. "I like that ending." They turned down their block, familiar cracks in the sidewalk guiding them home. Leela looked up at him suddenly, her tone quieter now, thoughtful. "Daddy, was it scary helping Miss Emma?" He didn't answer right away. The question settled into the space between them like a leaf on still water. He looked ahead, the sky tinged with violet, the first stars blinking awake. "Yeah," he said honestly. "It was." She nodded slowly, taking that in. "Then why did you do it?" Marcus glanced down at her, at the small hand curled into his. "So much trust, so much belief. Because it was the right thing," he said. "Even when it's hard, we still do what's right. That's what makes us who we are." Leela was quiet for a few steps more, then gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "That's why I wrote about you first," she said, shyly. "In my notebook. You're my favorite story." His throat tightened. He didn't respond, couldn't. Really? Some words are too big to answer out loud. They reached their apartment building, just as the horizon shifted. The sun, timid and golden, began to rise behind them, spilling soft light over the rooftops, stretching across the sidewalk, touching everything with the promise of something new. A neighbor across the street, who'd once barely nodded in passing, raised a hand in greeting. Another man from the office, someone who had once watched Marcus fall without a word, crossed paths and offered a quiet, "Hey, man, good evening." The world hadn't changed overnight, but something had softened. People saw him now, not loud or grand, but real, still, to the world. He wasn't a hero, just a man who showed up, did the work, kept his head down, a single dad doing what he could. But to Leela, he was the dragon slayer. The storm stopper. The man who did what was right, even when no one clapped. As they walked the final steps home, her small voice broke the quiet again. "Do you think Emma's okay?" Marcus looked out toward the horizon, the sun now warm against his face. I think she's finding her way. And with that, they stepped inside, into the soft light of their small, imperfect home, where love lived louder than fear. Would you have stopped to help the person who nearly ruined your life? Would you have left your job mid-shift, knowing it could cost you everything, just to make sure someone else didn't lose themselves completely? What would you have done? It's easy to say we'd do the right thing when the stakes are low. But what about when it hurts? When no one sees it? When the person in need is the one who pushed you to the edge? Marcus didn't have to help Emma. He had every reason to walk away. She humiliated him, lied about him, nearly cost him his livelihood. But in the moment, that mattered. He saw a human being, not just a boss, not just someone broken, but someone still worth saving. And sometimes, that's what compassion is. Not soft, not naive, but brave. It's choosing decency when no one else will. It's being the quiet anchor in someone else's storm. It's refusing to let bitterness win. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us, have you ever helped someone who hurt you? Or seen someone stand up when it would have been easier to look away? Your story might remind someone else what courage really looks like, because in a world full of noise, we still need stories like this. Not about perfect heroes, but about people who choose kindness anyway.